Hello everyone! This is just a quick little request I'd like to make before the video starts in earnest. To anyone interested in the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, I'd like you to subscribe to Sarcasmitron and watch his video series about the lead up to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. They're some of the best video essays that I have ever seen, and his channel is criminally underrated, so if you could, I'd like you to do him a service and subscribe to him. His videos are amazing, and I know anyone even remotely into video essays will love them. Now, with that over with, let's get back to the video proper. The date is February 24th, 2022, and the situation in Ukraine is reaching its nadir. Tensions have reached a boiling point at the Russian border as Putin's military forces have started to gather. This isn't even the first time tensions have flared up. For years, Ukraine has been attempting to manage tensions with its former occupier, whilst trying to fight Russian-backed insurgents attempting to bring the country into Putin's geopolitical grasp. But today is different. Today marks the beginning of a full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. The war, ongoing at the time of writing, has been one of the defining events of 2022, and has seen the displacement of families, demolition of people's homes, and an attempt to erase the Ukrainian culture. But thankfully, we on the left have been united in our opposition to what the Russian government is doing, and we have formed a united front into helping Ukraine win its war. Wait, is that circus music? Hey, don't do that, cut me off!
Russians are already actively shelling, strategic positions inside of Ukraine. They have boots on the ground, and this guy's like, oh, we're gonna give him guns. We'll give him more guns. Dude, they have guns, bro. They have guns. There is literally nothing you can do in this situation.
President Joe Biden?
Yeah.
Well, he's fueling the fire in the Ukraine for a start. That is a huge crime. Why won't the United States of America encourage Zelensky, or whatever his name is, the president, to negotiate and to explain why, when he stood on the platform of ratifying the Minsk agreements, which he did when he was elected by 73% of the Ukrainian population that was left able to vote. After that, somebody either whispered in his ear or he completely changed his mind about making peace in the Donbass and about solidifying the Minsk agreements and making peace with their Russian neighbors and obviating the need for this horrendous war that's killing.
You're blaming.
We don't know how many Ukrainians.
But you're blaming the party that got invaded. Come on, you've got it reversed.
No, I have.
For months.
Oh goody, an escalation of war. Now in this case, as you heard in that report, the Biden administration will now allow our European allies to transfer American-made F-16s to Ukraine, something that was considered a red line by the Biden administration previously, especially when we're dealing with another nuclear power, Russia.
The prospects diminish as the war continues. There are still openings. The United States is, and Britain, its lackey at this point, are pretty much isolated in their commitment to continuing the war, whatever the effects, in order to severely weaken Russia. Are there still negotiation possibilities? There's only one way to find out.
Oh god. So if you've been on the left long enough to see people say stuff like this, you're probably left with one question, namely, why in God's name are leftists who are supposed to be in favor of fighting imperialism, cultural erasure, and authoritarianism opposing support to Ukraine? There have been 50 leftists this applies to, but the one most well known for his god-awful takes has been our main man Noam Chomsky. So for that reason, I'll be talking about him. So let's get into that central question, why don't we? Why the fuck are Chomsky's takes on Ukraine so absolutely god-awful? Now, some of you are going to be quick to dismiss Chomsky's opposition to US intervention as a simple case of America bad syndrome, and sure, I very much consider that to be a factor. But I doubt it's the whole 9 yards, since Chomsky has shown himself to be intensely critical of the Soviet Union on multiple occasions. This was in the days before Russia transitioned to oligarchical capitalism, the days when the government at least paid lip service to the idea of being left-wing. Skipping forward to modern times, his views of Russia seem to be just as dim. In an interview Chomsky did with Lex Freeman, he described Russia as a kleptocratic regime, and Putin as an aspiring dictator. So I don't think Chomsky has a particularly rosy view of the Russian Federation. Now, to be clear, I do think Chomsky's stance is incorrect. I think Chomsky's judgment is clouded by his bias against the American government, and I think the things he's advocating for will harm Ukraine and benefit Putin. I'm not disagreeing with any of that. What I am saying is that there are more factors at play, that the stances Chomsky and many of the left are expressing are born out of intersecting factors created by years of history, such as fatalism, avoidance of conflict, a need to resolve things peacefully, and the fear of Armageddon. I think I've established enough to begin this analysis, so I think it's time to go back to the beginning. Part 1.
There was supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom!
The year is 1945. Chomsky is 16 years old, and even at this age, he's already politically active. By the time of August 6th, the Second World War has consumed the minds of many, but is starting to wind down. Germany has surrendered, Japan is rapidly losing territory, and Italy already left the fight a few years back. And then, it happens. Hiroshima is exposed to the horrors of the atomic bomb. Men are left nothing but literal shadows upon the walls. Children are being born with crippling birth defects, and many of the survivors will be forced to reckon with a lifetime of sickness and disability from radiation exposure. This is not the last time this happens, as 3 days later, a second bomb is dropped on Nagasaki. Over the space of these 3 days, the Earth has been radically changed, and with the death of the barbarism of the Nazis, a new threat has been born into this world. This single event has and continues to shape the course of the world in ways I think many of us, me included, can't even begin to comprehend. Without an understanding of how the bomb changed things, you can't even begin to have an understanding of the left's failures regarding Ukraine. So in order to help you understand this changed paradigm, we're going to have to go back in time to the story of Douglas MacArthur, Harry Truman, and a request that could have spelled the curtain call for humanity. The date is December 24th, 1950, and there is a war raging on to unite the Korean Peninsula. The US, despite making strong progress in the early stages of the conflict, has started to experience setbacks with the start of Chinese intervention. Faced with these challenges, Chief of War General Douglas MacArthur has come up with a proposal to stop Chinese advances. He wants to launch nuclear missiles. In the middle of a nuclear war. In the middle of the Cold War. Yeah, needless to say, it was something of a non-starter, and MacArthur lost his whole job over the indiscretion. Now, some of you might be asking, why talk about MacArthur's bomb scare that had no chance of being a threat over other closer calls, such as the Cuban Missile Crisis? Well, it's because it highlights a particular dynamic the anti-war left has been grappling with ever since the advent of nuclear missiles. Before the bomb was created, a disastrous war could upend your place in the world, but there'd still be a world. After the bomb, well, there might not be a world to have a place in. If you were pushing for more war, you were no longer just getting people killed. You were a maniacal idiot putting the very future of humanity itself at stake. Diplomacy didn't just seem desirable, anything else seemed unthinkable. Whenever Chomsky talks about the Ukrainian conflict, one of his chief concerns is that of a nuclear war. He's brought it up in every interview I've seen. I think the threat of nukes hanging over his head for much of his adult life is a major factor in his and many other people's terrible views on Ukraine. Compounding this problem is that Russia was our enemy during the Cold War. They were the enemy just best dealt with by negotiation back then, and because of that, they feel we should use negotiation now. They remember how the fear of nuclear devastation threatened them, how it endangered their friends and families, and they want to avoid war with Russia by any means necessary because of that. So many of the problems faced by the left in regards to Ukraine come from a Cold War mindset being forced to grapple with a modern world where it just doesn't hold up with reality. Part 2. Can't we just all get along? Over the course of the many years our movements have been around, the left has been trying to better the world in a myriad of ways. And of those, one of the most enduring designs we possess is the desire to create a world without bloodshed. It's a goal I find beautiful, and throughout history, many on the left have fought for it. Not just through opposing the powerful, but through actively practicing what we preach. Gandhi famously fought British oppression without ever raising his hand to strike. MLK used civil disobedience to undermine segregation without ever starting a fight. And many a trade unionist has won a labor dispute by doing literally nothing. However, if this attitude is left unchecked, it runs the nasty risk of devolving into the dogmatic assumption that you should never fight anyone no matter what. For example, when Gandhi learned of the horrors Jewish people faced under the tyrannical regime of Adolf Hitler, he naively suggested that they protest non-violently by surrendering to the butcher's knife, and committing an act of collective mass extinction to spur the world into action. This problem extended itself to many people, not just leftists, during the lead-up to the German conflict. Many had seen what occurred in the last war and desperately wanting to avoid the oncoming follow-up, allowed the German government to get away with whatever it wanted. Not only did this fail to achieve anything of value, it arguably made things worse by giving Germany the capacity to rearm and build a new standing army. This general aversion to conflict is a major cause of leftist reluctance to support Ukraine. However, I'd be doing you a disservice if I pretended this was the only reason this problem is present in the left. I think it's time to address the elephant in the room. Let's talk about America Bad Syndrome. As you know, we on the left aren't exactly big fans of the American government's foreign excursion. Mainly because a lot of their wars are, say it with me now, pointless wastes of human life that serve only to further American hegemony. This is a pretty reasonable take, but some of the left have become so absorbed in American war crimes that they've fallen into the habit of foregoing any and all rational thought and just slipping headfirst into declaring whatever America is doing bad simply because they're the ones doing it. Now, to be clear, I don't think this is the only reason anyone on the left might be a bit iffy about the Ukrainian conflict, but I do think it's a big cause of left-wing reluctance, and I do think we should acknowledge it as such. To anyone watching this, I implore you to realize that just because America is bad, that doesn't mean you should let that be the sole factor in your decision-making. If you choose to side against something just because America supports it, you're being just as much of an unthinking sheep as the people you claim to oppose. Think for yourself. Don't let America's wrongdoing blind you to the injustices of the Chinese, Syrian, or Russian governments. It's possible for two opposing groups to be bad at the same time. Now, moving on, let's get to the next part. Part 3. What's the point? The date is the 30th of August 2021. The US has decided that after a 20-year-long invasion and occupation of the nation of Afghanistan, that it is time to withdraw its troops from the country. The decision functionally leaves the Afghan government defenseless against Taliban insurgents. America has effectively surrendered the country to the Taliban. The withdrawal ends up a shit show as US weaponry is left behind, political dissidents are left at the mercy of the new regime, and refugees end up desperately trying to hitch a ride on the landing gears of departing aircraft in the vain hope of escaping the country. The years-long attempt to establish an American allied democracy has failed. The American government spent 2 decades dropping bombs, running deficits, and snuffing out lives for what in the end amounted to absolutely nothing. This isn't an isolated incident. Iraq, Vietnam, Korea. If you asked someone to name a pointless war America's fought, most people could give you at least a baker's dozen in the span of a few minutes. Throughout history, we have repeatedly seen the US learn the hard way that there is no such thing as an invincible military, that the winner isn't always who has the biggest army or the shiniest guns, that no matter who you are or what you do, you can still be defeated by people who a few years ago were just rice farmers. Many on the left have taken note of this fact and come to one erroneous conclusion, that the only way to react to US war plans is to fatalistically expect failure. I cannot stress enough how important comprehending this outlook is to understanding the leftist view on Ukraine. Whenever Chomsky talks about his views on the war, he always talks about it under the assumption that Russia will win, that Ukraine is doomed to lose the war, and that therefore the only thing we can do about it is negotiate to end Ukrainian suffering. This is why these stupid takes are popular with a lot of relatively reasonable leftists. They are fundamentally stuck in a Cold War mindset. If you listen to a pro-surrender leftist talk about Ukraine, you will hear them talk like Russia's military is still top dog, as though they're just crushing Ukraine, and that just isn't even remotely true. The Russian army has gotten so desperate for conscripts that they've been forced to resort to drafting prisoners. The soldiers have been reduced to using museum pieces from the Soviet era. Hell, the Russians have gotten so desperate for supplies that they've been reduced to looting whatever they can find from towns they're passing through. Since the beginning of this war, the Russians have been on the back foot, and they've been losing territory ever since. The simple, undeniable truth of this conflict that has made itself unflinchingly clear since the beginning is that Russia will lose. Its army is corrupt, incompetent, and clueless. If you are supposed to end the suffering of Ukrainian citizens over the course of this war, then I can prescribe only one singular action. Support the Ukrainian war effort. It is that simple. Conclusion. While I know for a fact that the war in Ukraine will end with Ukrainian victory, the effects of the issues surrounding it will ripple for years to come. I didn't just write this video specifically to talk about the issues surrounding leftist discourse on Ukraine. I made it because this dogma has been around for a very long time. And I know this isn't going to be the last time we see this mindset. They have been around before most of us have been born, and will likely persist until long after we're dead. I'm going to be the first to admit this. I don't know how to deal with these dogmatic delusions. But I do know that the first step to dealing with a problem is to acknowledge that it's there, and the second is to understand its root causes. If we on the left are to evolve on the anti-imperialist front, we'll have to sit down, reflect on our past, and move on as a community. If we don't, terrible takes like Chomsky's will hang over our heads during the next war of this kind, and we won't be able to mobilize against these atrocities. We will have to get better at analyzing these conflicts, and start thinking for ourselves instead of falling back and letting dogma do the thinking for us. I am not super prone to sentimentality, but I do want to add something a bit more hopeful at the end. Back in the day when I was getting more acutely aware of the flaws in our movements, I was losing faith in the left. I wondered how I could fight for the left when so many people engaged in such plain awful behavior. And then I realized something. I realized that I should stay part of the left, not because I was fine with it as it was, but rather so I could fight for what the movement could be. It is for this reason I think anyone who feels disillusioned with the left over these takes should stay with us. At the end of the day, I have faith that the left will sit down and reassess its position, because I think that there are too many good people with us for that not to happen. If history has proven us right about anything, it's that a better tomorrow is always available if you just fight for it. And it is only through people like you sticking with us and staying in this fight that we can improve the movement. If there's one thing I want you to remember after watching this video, it is this. While the world can be a dark place fraught with horror, there will always be hope for the future. And that hope doesn't come from a far-off place beyond the stars. It comes from us. In the end, we are the ones who can look a cold, heartless, and uncaring universe in the eye and bring into it a world where we can find meaning and happiness. Slava Ukraini.